Margaret Lennon was 27 years old when her wedding day nearly fell apart in a way she never imagined. During the reception at Magnolia Grove, her photographer, Rachel, pulled her aside. "You need to see this," she said quietly. In a small office, Rachel opened her laptop and played a video from earlier that morning. On the screen, Mallory Lewis, Margaret's mother-in-law, stood alone in the bridal suite. She looked calm, focused. Then she pulled a small metal tool from her purse. A seam ripper. Margaret felt her stomach drop as Mallory lifted the back of her dress and began cutting the inner lining with steady hands. "She planned this," Margaret whispered. Rachel nodded. "I think so." Margaret swallowed hard. "I need Gabriel to see this." In that moment, everything shifted. 6 months earlier, Gabriel Lewis proposed to Margaret at a small Italian restaurant off Route 9. No big scene, just candlelight and quiet music. He slid the ring across the table with a soft smile. "You know I don't like attention," he said. Margaret laughed, already emotional. "I know. That's why I love you." She said yes immediately. Later, she called her father, James Lennon. He listened, then said simply, "Good. He's a good man." That was enough. Gabriel then called his mother, Mallory Lewis. "We're engaged," he said proudly. There was silence. Margaret counted 3 seconds. "I suppose you've decided," Mallory replied flatly. No excitement. No warmth. Just a cold acceptance that left Margaret uneasy. Margaret had always felt that Mallory didn't truly accept her. Over the past year, Mallory had introduced Gabriel to another woman, Claire Bennett, more than once. Claire came from a wealthy, well-connected family. "They'd be a better match," Mallory once said openly. Gabriel always dismissed it. "She doesn't mean anything," he told Margaret. "That's just how she is." Margaret nodded, trying to believe him. She chose patience. She believed love would fix things. "She'll come around," Gabriel promised. But that phone call after the proposal stayed with her. The tone, the silence, the warning hidden inside polite words. Margaret ignored it, thinking it was just personality. She didn't realize it was something deeper. 2 months before the wedding, Margaret went dress shopping with her best friend Amy. The boutique in Carterville was calm and bright. Margaret stepped out in a lace A-line dress and stopped in front of the mirror. "This is it," she said softly. Amy smiled. "That's your dress." Just then, the door chimed. Mallory walked in holding a coffee. "Gabriel said you were here," she said. She circled Margaret slowly. "That fabric looks cheap," she added. Amy stiffened, but Margaret stayed calm. "I love it," she said. Mallory smiled thinly. "Of course you do." As they left, Amy whispered, "She took a picture of your dress." Margaret frowned. "Why?" Amy replied quietly, "She sent it to someone." 6 weeks before the wedding, Margaret received an email from the caterer. The menu had been changed to a formal plated dinner, double the cost. She hadn't approved it. She called Mallory immediately. "Did you change our catering?" she asked. "I improved it," Mallory replied calmly. "That buffet was embarrassing." Margaret's voice tightened. "It was our choice." Mallory sighed. "You're being dramatic." Margaret hung up and called Gabriel. After speaking with his mother, he called back. "She got emotional," he said. "Can we let her have this one?" Margaret shook her head. "No, we can't." She called the caterer and reversed the changes herself. That night, she sat quietly, realizing something important. This wasn't about help. It was about control. 3 weeks before the wedding, Margaret drove to the Lewis family home to pick up the finalized guest list from Gabriel's father. She let herself in through the side door, expecting a quiet visit. Instead, she heard Mallory's voice from the living room. "She's a vet assistant, Carol," Mallory said sharply over the phone. Margaret froze. "My son could have had Claire, educated, connected. Instead, he's marrying a girl whose father builds furniture." Margaret's chest tightened. She stood there, hand against the wall, listening. "This marriage won't last 2 years," Mallory continued. The words hit hard. Margaret stepped into the kitchen, forcing her voice steady. "I came for the guest list." Mallory turned, eyes wide for a second, then composed. Margaret grabbed the folder and left without another word. In her car, she cried until her hands stopped shaking. Margaret didn't tell Gabriel what she heard. Not then. She convinced herself it would only cause problems before the wedding. The rehearsal dinner came a week later, held in the Lewis backyard under soft lights. Around 30 guests gathered, laughing and celebrating. Mallory stood to give a toast. "I always imagined Gabriel's wedding differently," she began with a smile. A few polite laughs followed. She shared sweet childhood stories about Gabriel, drawing smiles from the crowd. Then she added, "And of course his dear friend Claire." She glanced briefly at Margaret. The moment passed quickly, but it was enough. When she finished, she raised her glass. "To Gabriel, may you always find your way home." She never said Margaret's name. Under the table, Margaret's father, James Lennon, squeezed her hand gently. Amy leaned closer. "That was intentional," she whispered. Margaret nodded slowly. "I know." Later that night, Gabriel walked Margaret to her car. The air was quiet, heavy with everything unsaid. "Your mom didn't mention me," Margaret said softly. Gabriel sighed. "I noticed. I'm sorry." Margaret looked at him directly. "If something happens tomorrow, will you stand with me?" "Not between us. With me." Gabriel didn't hesitate. He held her face gently. "I will. I promise." Margaret searched his eyes, needing to believe him. "Don't let me stand alone," she said. "You won't," he replied firmly. She drove home holding on to those words. That promise became her anchor, something she repeated to herself as she lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling of her childhood bedroom, wondering if she was making the right choice. On the morning of the wedding, the bridal suite at Magnolia Grove filled with laughter and movement. Margaret sat at the vanity while Amy adjusted her veil. Music played softly in the background. Photographer Rachel arrived early, setting up her equipment. In the corner, she placed a small GoPro on a tripod. "Just for behind-the-scenes moments," she explained. Margaret nodded, distracted by the excitement. Around 9:45, there was a knock. Mallory entered, dressed perfectly, carrying a small velvet box. "I brought something for you," she said. Inside were antique earrings. "These belonged to my mother." Margaret's throat tightened. "They're beautiful." "Thank you." Mallory carefully placed them on her. For a brief moment, everything felt normal, almost warm. Margaret allowed herself to believe things might be changing. At 10:30, Rachel suggested taking outdoor photos while the light was perfect. Margaret and the bridal party left the suite, laughter trailing behind them. Mallory stayed behind. "My knee is bothering me," she said. "I'll watch your things." Margaret hesitated for a second, then nodded. "We'll be back soon." The door closed, leaving Mallory alone. The room fell silent. Slowly, she stood up. No sign of pain now. She walked to the door, listened, then turned back. From her purse, she pulled out a seam ripper. She looked at the empty room, then at the dress. Certain. She sat down and waited, knowing Margaret would take the dress off again before the ceremony. And when that moment came, she would be ready. Margaret returned to the bridal suite just after 11, still glowing from the photos. "Those shots are going to be amazing," Amy said, laughing. Mallory sat exactly where they left her, scrolling on her phone. "Everything's just as you left it," she said smoothly. Margaret smiled, relieved. She carefully stepped out of her dress to rest before the ceremony. Amy hung it neatly on the rack. "You've got about an hour," Amy said. "Eat something." Margaret nodded, sipping water, unaware that while they were gone, Mallory had already acted. When Margaret stepped away to adjust her makeup, Mallory moved quickly. She lifted the dress slightly and used the seam ripper to cut into the inner lining at the lower back. Clean, precise cuts. Then she stepped away, returning to her seat as if nothing had happened. When Margaret put the dress back on later, everything looked perfect, but something inside had already been broken. At 12:45, Amy helped Margaret back into her dress. "You look perfect," she said, adjusting the lace. Margaret smiled, though something felt slightly off at her lower back. "Maybe I'm just nervous," she whispered. Amy checked the zipper. "Everything looks fine." Margaret nodded and pushed the feeling aside. In the hallway, her father, James Lennon, waited. He offered his arm quietly. "Ready?" he asked. Margaret took a deep breath. "Ready." The ceremony was beautiful. Sunlight streamed through stained glass as she walked down the aisle. Gabriel stood at the altar, eyes shining. "You look incredible," he mouthed. Margaret smiled, her heart full. They exchanged vows, hands trembling slightly. For that moment, everything felt right. She didn't know the damage hidden beneath the fabric. She didn't know someone had already tried to ruin this day. She only knew she was marrying the man she loved. The reception began with laughter and music. Guests filled the hall, glasses raised, voices warm and celebratory. Margaret moved between tables, smiling, thanking everyone. But as she sat down, she felt it again, that strange looseness at her lower back. Subtle, but wrong. She reached behind her, pressing lightly against the fabric. It held, but something beneath shifted. Amy leaned closer. "Your dress feels a little loose here," she whispered. Margaret forced a smile. "It's probably nothing." Across the room, Mallory watched her. For just a moment, their eyes met. Mallory lifted her glass, smiling, but it wasn't kind. It was knowing. Amy saw it too. Her hand tightened around Margaret's wrist under the table. Neither of them spoke, but both understood something wasn't right. During the speeches, everything appeared perfect. Gabriel's best man spoke first, then Amy, who brought half the room to tears. Finally, Mallory stood. Her voice was warm, controlled, almost loving. She praised Margaret, called her wonderful and strong, and spoke about welcoming her into the family. Guests smiled, touched by her words. Margaret sat there, confused. Was she wrong about Mallory? Had she misunderstood everything? When Mallory leaned in to hug her, the room applauded. But as she embraced Margaret, she whispered softly into her ear, "Enjoy it while it lasts." Margaret froze. Her smile stayed, but her blood turned cold. When Mallory pulled away, her expression was perfect again. No one else heard. No one else saw. But Margaret knew. Whatever was happening, it wasn't over. The first dance began under soft lights. Gabriel held Margaret gently, his hand resting at her lower back. They moved slowly, surrounded by their guests. Then Margaret felt it, a sharp pull inside the dress. A quiet tearing sound. She stiffened slightly. "Are you okay?" Gabriel whispered. "My dress feels tight," she said softly. They slowed their movements, finishing the dance carefully. To everyone else, it looked romantic. But Margaret knew something was wrong. As soon as the music ended, she walked quickly, calmly, to the restroom. Amy followed immediately. Inside, Margaret turned her back to the mirror and looked. The lining was torn open, several inches split along the lower seam. Amy crouched behind her, examining it closely. Her face hardened. "This wasn't an accident," she said quietly. "Someone cut this." Margaret's breath caught. They both knew who. Then came a knock on the door. Rachel's voice, urgent. "Margaret, I need to show you something right now." Margaret opened the restroom door slowly. Rachel stepped in, laptop already in her hands. She took one look at the torn lining, then at Margaret's face, and nodded. "It's worse than you think," she said quietly. Amy stepped aside. "Show her." Rachel placed the laptop on the counter and pressed play. The video showed the empty bridal suite, sunlight pouring through the windows. Then Mallory stood up. No limp. No hesitation. She walked to the door, listened, then turned back. From her purse, She pulled out the seam ripper. Margaret felt her chest tighten. "No," she whispered. They watched in silence as Mallory lifted the dress and began cutting into the lining. Slow, careful, deliberate. Every movement controlled. When the video ended, the room felt too small. "She planned it," Margaret said, her voice steady now. "She wanted this to happen." "I need Gabriel to see this," Margaret said. Her hands had stopped shaking. Something inside her had shifted. Rachel nodded. "Let's go." They found Gabriel near the bar, laughing with his uncle. Margaret touched his arm. "I need you. Now." He didn't question her tone. He followed immediately. They walked down a quiet hallway into a small office. Amy stood at the door, keeping others out. Rachel set the laptop down. "You need to watch this," Margaret said. "Twice." Gabriel sat, confused but focused. Rachel pressed play. The first time, he didn't move. His face went still. His jaw tightened as he watched his mother pull the tool from her purse. The second time, he leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes locked on the screen. When it ended, silence filled the room. Gabriel stared at the frozen image of Mallory on the screen. "She brought that with her," he said quietly. Margaret nodded. "Yes." He ran a hand through his hair, breathing slowly. "During the dance. That's why you stopped moving." "Yes." 10 seconds passed. Then 15. Gabriel stood up. Not in anger, not loudly, but with something colder. Something final. "Last night I made you a promise," he said. Margaret's eyes met his. "I remember." He nodded once. "Then I'm keeping it." She reached for his arm. "Don't shout. Just tell the truth." He looked at her, steady. "I will." He opened the door and walked out. Margaret followed close behind. The music from the reception drifted down the hallway, unaware of what was about to happen. The reception hall was full, laughter and music filling the air. Gabriel walked straight through the crowd, his expression calm but unreadable. People began to notice. Conversations slowed. The DJ lowered the volume slightly, sensing a shift. Margaret followed just behind him, her heart steady now. Amy stopped mid-conversation as she saw his face. One by one, guests turned. The room quieted without anyone asking it to. Gabriel stopped at Mallory's table. She looked up, smiling. "Gabriel, come sit." He didn't sit. "Mom," he said clearly, his voice carrying across the room. "Before the ceremony, you were in the bridal suite alone." Mallory's smile faltered slightly. "I was resting my knee," she replied. "Why?" Gabriel didn't raise his voice. "You opened your purse," he said evenly. "You took out a seam ripper. And you cut Margaret's wedding dress." The room went completely silent. Not a whisper. Not a breath. Mallory stared at him, her face draining of color. "That's ridiculous," she said quickly. "I would never—" "It's on video," Gabriel interrupted. "I watched it twice." A murmur rippled through the crowd, low and stunned. Mallory's composure cracked for a second. "I was just looking at it," she said, her voice unsteady. Gabriel didn't move. "You brought the tool from home," he said. "That wasn't an accident." No one stepped in. No one defended her. The silence around the table felt heavier than any argument. And for the first time, Mallory had nowhere to hide. Mallory's eyes moved around the room, searching for support, for someone to interrupt, to soften what was happening. No one did. "You're embarrassing me," she said sharply, her voice breaking slightly. "At your own wedding?" Gabriel didn't react. "You embarrassed yourself," he replied calmly. Frank sat beside her, silent, his hands folded on the table. He didn't look at her. That silence said more than any words could. A woman at the next table slowly set down her glass. Another guest shook her head. Mallory's breathing quickened. "I've done everything for you," she said, her voice rising. "Everything." But even that sounded rehearsed now. Empty. The room didn't move. It watched. And for the first time, Mallory realized she wasn't in control of this moment anymore. Margaret stepped forward, standing beside Gabriel, not behind him. Her voice was calm, steady. "I spent 4 years trying to earn your respect," she said. Mallory opened her mouth to respond, but Margaret didn't stop. "I ignored the comments, the interference, the way you treated me like I didn't belong." The room listened closely. "I heard you 3 weeks ago," she added, "telling someone I wasn't good enough, that this marriage wouldn't last." A soft murmur spread across the guests. Mallory's face tightened. "That's not—" "It is," Margaret said firmly. "I heard every word." She took a breath, grounding herself. "I'm not angry anymore. I'm done pretending." Her words were quiet, but they carried across the room with clarity. Gabriel reached for Margaret's hand, holding it firmly. "You don't get to hurt her and act like nothing happened," he said. His voice remained low, controlled. "Not anymore." Mallory's composure finally broke. Tears filled her eyes. "You're choosing her over your own mother?" she asked, her voice shaking. Gabriel didn't hesitate. "I'm choosing what's right." The words landed heavily. Around the room, people shifted, some nodding quietly. Frank finally spoke, his voice tired. "Mallory, enough." It was the first time he had intervened. Mallory looked at him, shocked. "You too," she whispered. But Frank didn't look away this time. He held her gaze, and something in that moment changed. The power she had held for years began to slip. Mallory stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I won't stay here and be attacked," she said, gathering her purse with shaking hands. No one stopped her. No one followed. She looked around one last time, expecting someone, anyone, to come to her side. No one did. Without another word, she turned and walked toward the exit. The doors closed behind her with a soft but final sound. The room remained still for a few seconds, as if everyone needed to process what they had just witnessed. Then slowly, quietly, the tension began to lift. Conversations didn't return immediately, but the silence no longer felt heavy. It felt clear. Margaret exhaled slowly, realizing her hands were no longer shaking. Gabriel squeezed her hand gently. "Are you okay?" he asked. She nodded. "I will be." Amy appeared beside her, holding a small garment bag. "I brought a backup," she said softly. Inside was a simple white dress. Margaret smiled faintly. "Of course you did." She changed quickly, and when she returned, she felt lighter, not just physically, but emotionally. Gabriel held out his hand again. "Dance with me," he said. This time, there was no fear, no tension. Just quiet certainty. As they stepped onto the dance floor, the music resumed, and life slowly returned to the room. But nothing was the same anymore. And for the first time that day, Margaret felt completely free. The rest of the reception moved forward, quieter but more real. Guests approached Margaret and Gabriel one by one, offering gentle words and steady support. No one mentioned Mallory directly, but everyone understood. Amy stayed close, her presence constant. Rachel passed by briefly and whispered, "I'll send you everything." Margaret nodded. "Thank you for showing me." As the evening softened, laughter slowly returned. Not forced, not loud, just natural. Gabriel's aunt squeezed Margaret's hand. "You handled that with grace," she said. Margaret smiled faintly. "I just told the truth." Later, as the night ended, Margaret looked around the room, at the people who stayed, who chose to stand with them. It wasn't the wedding she imagined, but it felt honest, and that mattered more. The next morning, Margaret woke up in a quiet hotel room. Sunlight filtered through the curtains. Gabriel sat at the edge of the bed, already awake. "I keep thinking about it," he said softly. "The way she planned it." Margaret sat beside him. "It wasn't a mistake," she said. "It was a choice." Gabriel nodded, his jaw tight. I promised you I'd stand with you. And I will. They talked for hours, calmly, clearly. By the end, they made a decision together. No contact with Mallory for now. Not anger, not punishment, just distance. We need space, Margaret said. Gabriel agreed. And if anything changes, he added, it has to start with the truth. For the first time since the wedding, they felt aligned. Not just as a couple, but as a team. 3 days later, Gabriel sent his mother a message. It was simple, direct, and respectful. He explained what she had done and what needed to happen if she wanted to repair the relationship. No blame, no insults, just clear boundaries. Margaret read it before he sent it. It's fair, she said. Mallory didn't reply to him. Instead, she reached out through Gabriel's sister. Mom says you've been influenced, the message read. Gabriel looked at his phone, then set it down. I'm not responding to that. Later that evening, his sister texted Margaret directly. I'm sorry, she wrote. I didn't know everything. Margaret stared at the message for a long moment, then replied, Thank you for saying that. It wasn't resolution, but it was something. In the weeks that followed, the story spread quietly through their town. Not through gossip, but through simple conversations. People talked about what they had seen, about what had happened. Mallory stopped attending her usual gatherings. At church, she sat in the back instead of the front. Conversations around her grew shorter. The absence of her usual confidence was noticeable. Meanwhile, Margaret focused on rebuilding her peace. She and Gabriel settled into their home, creating small routines. Cooking dinner together. Sitting on the porch in the evenings. Talking about everything they had avoided before. I didn't realize how much I was trying to keep the peace, Gabriel admitted one night. Margaret nodded. We don't have to do that anymore. And they didn't. 1 month after the wedding, a package arrived at their door. A gift basket, wine, chocolates, a handwritten note. Thinking of you both. Love, Mom. Margaret read it silently, then looked at Gabriel. There's no apology, she said. He nodded. No accountability. They left the basket unopened. It sat by the door for 2 days before being moved aside. That evening, Mallory called. Margaret answered. I think we should move forward, Mallory said calmly. Margaret's voice stayed steady. That depends on whether you're ready to acknowledge what happened. Silence followed. Then, you're making this bigger than it is. Margaret closed her eyes briefly. No, she said. I'm just not ignoring it anymore. She ended the call. When Gabriel came in, she told him everything. He didn't ask her to call back. He simply nodded. And that silence, this time, felt like strength. 6 weeks after the wedding, Margaret received an email from Rachel. Your gallery is ready, the subject read. She opened it slowly, Gabriel standing behind her. The photos loaded one by one. Soft light, quiet smiles, small honest moments. Her father adjusting his tie. Amy laughing mid-sentence. Gabriel at the altar, eyes full. Then one photo stopped her. It wasn't posed. It was taken from across the room after everything happened. Margaret and Gabriel walking side by side, hands held tightly, moving back toward their table. Behind them, Mallory's table sat half empty. In front of them, the room was still full. People who stayed. Rachel had written a note beneath the gallery. Not because of what happened, but because of how you handled it, you'll be okay. Margaret saved that photo immediately. A week later, Margaret met Gabriel's sister, Laura, at a small cafe on Main Street. Laura looked tired, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. I should have said something, she admitted quietly. Margaret didn't interrupt. Laura continued, I've seen how Mom can be, but I never thought she'd go that far. There was no defense in her voice, only honesty. I believe you, she added. Margaret nodded. That matters. They sat in silence for a moment. I'm not ready to cut her off, Laura said. She's still my mother. Margaret understood. I'm not asking you to choose, she replied gently. Just don't pretend it didn't happen. Laura nodded slowly. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was a beginning. A small shift toward truth. 3 months after the wedding, life had settled into something steady. Margaret and Gabriel lived in a small home on Birch Lane, simple but peaceful. Evenings were quiet, shared meals, soft conversations, no tension hanging in the air. Gabriel had started therapy, something he once resisted. I didn't realize how much I was managing her emotions, he said one night. Margaret listened. That's not your job anymore, she replied. He nodded, thoughtful. I'm still learning that. They were both learning. Not just how to move forward, but how to build something healthier than what came before. For the first time, their relationship felt grounded, not in avoiding conflict, but in facing it honestly. 4 months after the wedding, a letter arrived. Not a message, not a call, a handwritten letter. Mallory's handwriting was careful, controlled. Gabriel opened it slowly and read aloud. She wrote that she had started therapy, that she didn't fully understand why she did what she did, that she was trying. Margaret listened quietly. When he finished, they sat in silence. It's not an apology, Margaret said. Gabriel nodded. No. But it's something. He folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. They didn't respond. Not yet. They had learned that words alone weren't enough. Change would take time. Real effort. And until then, distance remained necessary. One afternoon in early winter, Margaret visited her father, James Lennon. He was in the garage, sanding down a piece of wood. She joined him without a word, taking a second block of sandpaper. They worked side by side in quiet rhythm. After a while, he spoke. Your mom would be proud of you. Margaret paused, her chest tightening slightly. She would have liked Gabriel too, she said. James nodded. He stood by you. That's what matters. They finished the piece together, brushing off the dust. As Margaret drove home later, she thought about everything that had changed. The wedding hadn't been perfect. It had been difficult, painful even. But it had shown her something clear, who stood with her and who didn't. And that truth had given her something stronger than a perfect day ever could. 5 months after the wedding, Thanksgiving arrived quietly. No large gathering, no tension-filled seating arrangements. Just Margaret, Gabriel, James, Amy, and a couple of close friends around a small table. The food was simple: roast turkey, mashed potatoes, and cornbread that came out slightly overcooked. James brought a store-bought pie, placing it on the table like it was something special. Best one they had, he said. Everyone laughed. The room felt warm, easy. No careful words. No walking on edges. After dinner, Gabriel leaned back in his chair and smiled. This feels peaceful. Margaret looked around the table, taking it in. It is, she said softly. And for the first time in a long time, peace didn't feel fragile. It felt real. In December, another letter came from Mallory. This one was longer, slower, more honest. She wrote about her therapy sessions, about control, fear, and the feeling of losing her place in her son's life. I was wrong, she admitted. Not just in what I did, but in how I treated you from the beginning. Gabriel read the letter twice before handing it to Margaret. She read it carefully, line by line. There was no excuse this time. No shifting blame. Just acknowledgement. Margaret set the letter down quietly. This is different, she said. Gabriel nodded. It is. They didn't rush to respond. But something had shifted again, not a full repair, but a door opening slowly, carefully, this time built on truth instead of control. A few weeks later, Margaret stood in their living room holding a framed photo. It was Rachel's picture, the one taken after everything happened. She hammered a small hook into the wall and hung it above the shelf. When Gabriel walked in, he stopped beside her. That one? He asked. Margaret nodded. It's my favorite. He studied it quietly. It doesn't look like a perfect wedding photo. Margaret smiled slightly. It's not. It's better. The image showed them walking forward together, leaving chaos behind, stepping toward something steadier. Gabriel slipped his arm around her shoulders. We made it through, he said. Margaret leaned into him. We did. And more than that, they had grown stronger because of it. Margaret often thought about that day, not the ceremony, not the decorations, but the moment everything changed. The hallway. The video. The decision Gabriel made without hesitation. It wasn't dramatic in the way people expected. It was quiet, clear. He chose truth over comfort. And that choice reshaped everything. Margaret realized something important. Family wasn't about titles or expectations. It was about actions. About who stood beside you when it mattered most. She didn't hate Mallory. She understood her, in a way. The fear of losing control. The fear of being replaced. But understanding didn't mean accepting harm. And for the first time, Margaret felt no need to earn her place. She had already claimed it. The wedding day didn't go as planned. The dress was damaged. The moment was tested. But the foundation beneath it held strong. Months later, standing in that same living room, Margaret looked at the life she and Gabriel had built. Quiet, honest, and real. Not perfect, but theirs. The dress was torn, she said one evening, glancing at the photo. Gabriel smiled faintly. But we weren't. She nodded. That was the truth that stayed. Not the betrayal, not the confrontation, but the choice they made to stand together. And in the end, that choice mattered more than anything else. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this story. It truly means a lot. If you've ever had to set boundaries with someone in your own family, or you're still finding the strength to do it, share your experience in the comments. I'd genuinely love to hear your story. Also, let me know where you stand. Are you team, I would have confronted her earlier, or team, Margaret handled it just right? Drop your thoughts below. If this story resonated with you, don't keep it to yourself. Pass it along to someone who might need it today. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and check out the description for more powerful stories like this one. This is Abbey Wealth Folktales. And remember, you deserve respect in every space you walk into.